introduction. Okay. I'll go with it. Yeah, so I'm asked to come and visit with you this afternoon about some of our adventures with corn. We're always learning. We learn lots just listening. Add a little bit to what Gina was telling you from our experiences. Is my objective, make you think a little bit. Yeah, and so I guess I need to just mention some of the changes that are happening at the university. My program has always been applied cow-calf and forage research with Western Beef Development Center for a number of years, but now we're all under one roof. I've been at Lanigan for that many years, still at Lanigan. In fact, I'm out there till 2020, obligated with research out there, and that's kind of some of the resources we get to work with. With our program, looking at basically managing that beef cow in the calendar year, and putting forages in front of her is a big part. Perennial annual species, and certainly some of these novel crops that are coming at us. And just in the last 2 to 3 years, we've been entered into lots of meetings and conversations, and now physically relocating replicated work anyway at Clavet, Saskatchewan. So instead of being an hour and a half off of campus, I'm now 20 minutes off campus. And so probably a situation where we can do labs, we can take students out there, and we can use it as a training and teaching facility. I've been very fortunate to also collaborate with Dr. McKinnon. He was going to talk right after me over those years and just connect the dots in terms of the beef animal from birth all the way to slaughter. And so under the new Livestock Forage Center of Excellence, there's really 3 units that we brought together. Our program has been Atlantic and Western beef, so cow-calf forage with Dr. Buchanan looking at the feedlot end of things, background in feedlot end of things, and with the Western College of Vet Med with their Goodale Farm. So now we really have a lot of disciplines that we can conduct under one umbrella, under one model. Looking at a research study, and maybe not just looking at 2 disciplines, we can look at 3 or 4. And so that's fantastic for us as researchers. We can bring in lots more folks, and I do ask you to mark down a date. June the 18th will be our first field day at the new center at Clavet, Saskatchewan. I just noticed there's an email today that the registrations are up on Eventbrite. There's no cost. Okay, so basically a one-day event similar to we held at Lanigan for over 20 years. Just a workshop and an open house, just talking about some of the research that's going to be happening or has happened at the Livestock Forage Center of Excellence. So I go back to some of the data that my colleague Kathy Larson, she was our beef economist and still continues to be an economist with the Ag Ec Department University, and she was involved in this big survey. Maybe some of you in the room. First of all, I'm going to ask 2 questions. How many people have beef cows at home? Okay. How many people have grown corn? Okay, well, Travis, I don't have to do my talk now. What's that? Anyway, so Kathy was involved in a survey along with a lot of other organizations you see here, looking at what practices beef producers are using, and summation of that was maybe adoption of a lot of different systems. And so this is just a sneak peek of her findings, and you can see that nearly 2/3 had adopted some type of an extensive system other than Drylot feeding their cows round bales in a round bale feeder for 5 or 6 months. And so, and that varies tremendously across our province, across Western Canada, because running a beef cow at Prince Albert, Saskatchewan is a lot different than at East End, Saskatchewan, or Grand Prairie, Alberta, or Brandon, Manitoba, or Vanderhoof, BC. And I've spoke about this topic in all those places. And so there's challenges, there's environment, there's elements, wind, snow cover, snow depth, wildlife, keep going, right? And so to adopt these systems, you need to certainly be prudent in relation to which one of them are going to work for you. You can see there's a lot of options out there for you to adopt and all of these are not the end all be all for wherever you live. In Outlet, Saskatchewan, maybe none of them. I don't know. You know, or maybe some folks have tried swath grazing. I know, Dennis, you've done it for many years. You've been growing corn too for quite a few years, right? Yeah, about 12 years. And bale grazing is another one that's taken off. I'll speak to that here in a minute. So I always say don't put all your eggs in one basket. Maybe think about 2 or 3, because sometimes Mother Nature is not going to allow you to just winter your cows on one of these systems. But certainly the adoption of that's taken place, and you can see for our Saskatchewan folks that were involved in that survey, a lot have adopted this extensive feeding practice. And that's another challenge. I think I just heard what the price of hay was at lunch here today. It's terrible with drought, lack of rainfall in 2018. So we're always looking at alternatives to bringing in mixed hay. So all of a sudden we're trying to build a straw-based diet with whatever screening pellets or whatever is cost effective. And we know that's always going to be variable from year to year. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the work we've done at WBDC, or now known as LFCE, over those many years. And I go back to some very simple 101 stuff, is that have a goal. If you're going to extensive graze, do your homework, make sure you get all your ducks in a row. Don't be doing it just to save money. You have to obviously be comfortable with it. The cows have to be comfortable with it. Everybody has to get used to this change in how we overwinter. In fact, there was a situation a couple of weeks ago of a producer in this eastern part of the province where he was warned and he did not adhere to those warnings, and his herd was seized because he was not looking after them in terms of cattle welfare in an extensive grazing system. Today, there's a lot of folks driving up and down our grid roads, right, with those things that are on your table there. And so I think we need to be wise and prudent about animal welfare, especially in the winter time. So really it's all about this. We toyed with that just a little bit, capturing deposition of manure nutrients. And our objective have always been, in our research program, to maintain body weight. And so we have our cows coming into that winter grazing program, an adequate body condition, and maintain that body condition coming all the way out into calving. Thin cows do not rebreed. And so we want to look at maybe some of these systems. We've done a lot of research on them over the years. I'll give you our website at the end of my talk here, but certainly we'll talk about this one here this afternoon, as well as touch a little bit on some of the other cool season, warm season crops we looked at. We've seen some nutritive value data thrown up there as well. In a simplistic case, it's looking at what that gestating female needs as a breeding animal in terms of energy, right, which is the blue line, and in terms of protein. And so her protein requirements are going to range from 6 to 11, right, percent, and her TDN 45 to about 60. So in there somewhere, this is probably where you're going to wean that 5-month calf off of her. So an opportunity maybe to get her on some low quality extensive grazing, but certainly pay attention as she gets into her 2nd and 3rd trimester of pregnancy, even if she's on grazing corn plots. And I'll speak to that in a minute. and be aware of that. But this is the big thing, is that when she's out there in February, that 5-week period was probably the coldest since 1939, we're being told by our weather folks. Her requirements ramp up significantly, and so she's going to need more energy. If you don't give her that energy in that diet, she's going to start to mobilize body fat. And I've measured ribbon rump fat in a lot of our research, and you know, we put a cow out there with about a 15 millimeter rib fat or something like that, and we come back and do another ultrasound, we can see, you know, that body fat changing just because of the wind chill factor. And so what does that mean? It means that we need to give her adequate wind protection, and that's huge. We've done our very best to clear every tree off of every acre of our farm or our ranch, and now we have to go out and purchase these things. And so it's kind of ironic. But yeah, so lots of fields have natural shelter belts, and that's good. But that is the big thing. And I mean, I take my students out for a lab, and it could be like -20 with about a 15-click wind blowing. And we get them out there in the field, and then we stand out exposed to the wind, or we go behind that portable windbreak, and it's just like night and day. You get it. You get the difference with that porosity windbreak. Here's another one, fencing, and everybody has a different opinion on fencing, whether it's permanent or whether it's portable. I've got producers who really take this and use it as a tool to control that utilization. And some producers that really have an aversion for fencing, and that's up to you, it's to your comfort level. But we use it in our research to control access to new forage. As we heard, right, Luke, there's a lot of chances here to get these water points onto your operation, summer systems, winter systems. So over the years, we've developed all of these at Lanigan, and so we showcase them in our open houses, and so we're just setting some of these up at the Clavette site right now. In fact, we just put in some pipeline to get our paddock set up. We've got a bunch of grazing studies starting, and so to me, it's like we'll work with the latest technology, solar technology, whatever it is, get it out there at our research facility, so you as producers can come and kick the tires on our field day and say, hey, is this thing going to work? It's just like these guys. You know, they do freeze up. They're not frost-free. And we're not afraid to say that to the producers. The guys in Alberta that sell them don't want to hear that, but they do freeze up. That's what you want to see, because you've chosen that nutrient-deficient place on your farm or your ranch, and you've winter fed out there and deposition of mineral nutrients. Nice level field of turds, and that's really what you're capturing is the fecal and urine material. This is not what you want to see. And that was many years ago now, 13 years ago, we were trying to background calves on millet, and we had 2 freezing rains and a snowstorm, and so they just could not prehend the feed. It was just saturated and frozen, and so we had to pull them off and come back to plan B, which is what? Feedlot, pen, feeding them round bales, right? So we came back in the spring and used that field up afterwards, absolutely. So, you know, Mother Nature's not always going to work with you. I want to talk a little bit now about some of the advantages of having critters out there. There's a good robust portable windbreak. You can move it from field to field. We have some of those at our research facility. This is some benchmark work that we did many years ago. It was about 04, 05. We actually did the work and then got it published later on with my colleague, Dr. Jeff Shano. He's a soil scientist at University of Saskatchewan. And so our idea was to look at a couple of these systems that, here's one that, you know, folks purchase these bale processors as well. So they maybe work off farm, I don't know. And so that was a popular system where you see a lot of folks having those on their farm. And then the bale grazing, where that's simply where you're putting up your feed, your round bales in a grid pattern, okay? And then you can put them on their end, you can put them on their side. Don't ask your wife to come out here and take the strings off in January. You might not be that popular. But it really is a challenging system to think of. You know, some of the older producers who are used to putting a round bale or a square bale into a feeder, why would I put a round bale in a field, right? And watch my cows go after it, you know? So, but it really does work. And to me, it's about the number of critters you're going to have out there. So the more the merrier, up to about 200 head, 250 works quite nicely, about 100, 150, and giving them 3 or 4 days of fresh grazing using portable electric fence, that you're going to not allow them to get at the rest of these bales, that's key. That's key. And making sure they camp there. We got herds in Manitoba that are taking this system, running 800 cows and bale grazing from November all the way out till April. And so they've tweaked the system, they've learned from our mistakes, and they've adapted it big time. There's your traditional dry lot where the critters come in October and they're managed, fed on that straw pack all the way out till the calving. That's kind of the system that I grew up with in the northern region. So we have 2 field systems and then a pen system. We also had our site was a really old pasture, tired old Russian wild ryegrass pasture, needed to be broke up and reseeded. And so we did our study on that old pasture, about a 30-year-old stand that was not producing. So we really have 2 field systems here, and then we also put manure out there with equipment. So we put out fresh livestock manure or composted, and of course a control area. So we're just measuring a lot of variables here, and obviously you want an area where no manure deposition took place. This is just the soil samples, okay, the soil ammonium and nitrogen, and these red bars are just the soil test levels of ammonium nitrogen in the fall, before any feeding event, before any manure went out there. And then of course these are the spring, after we had the cows out there, okay, went back and soil sampled. And you can see 2.5, 3 times the level in terms of N where the critters were. And so where's that coming from? It's coming from the urine nitrogen. And so they're excreting it, it's on that site, it's there for the subsequent crop, whether it's a perennial or maybe an annual crop, it's there. Here it's not there, because that N's very mobile in that straw pack, in that pen. It volatilizes off, it leaches off. And so when you're going out there 6 months or maybe a year later and cleaning those pens, you're not capturing all that nutrients that were deposited in that pen months previously. How did that old pasture respond? Well, that's just a visual, and you can see it's green, leafy, vegetative versus that particular field right there. This is the following spring. And so where we put the critter out there for how many days, we've nearly 3-fold increase in yield, and compared to that 60% increase where we put some manure on. So that's what you're capturing. Our student also did a quick calculation on the level of nitrogen and phosphorus. It started out in the round bale, went through the digestive system, and then was excreted in the manure. And we calculated and what we found in the grass later on. And so for those field feeding systems, the average of the bale process and bale graze was we could account for 34% of the N and 22% of the P that started in the round bale showed up out here. It's not a closed system. There is some escape, okay? Now we look at the Drylot system, we can only account for 7 and 4%. And so that's really what producers have been doing is they've been feeding on these nutrient deficient sites, and it's rejuvenation. It's just taking and kickstarting that few acres or 40 acres or whatever by winter feeding out there or planting some type of a crop so the cows are out there. We did our calculations. That's what our engineering friends tell us. A lot of the N is coming through the urine, and most of the phosphorus is coming from the fecal material, because we chose to winter 64 cows for 110 days. We're accounting for some losses, okay, about 30% leaves. We chose to winter on that nutrient site. We're getting about 100 pounds of N left there for the next growing season or the next crop. That's what it is, folks. That's called litter. Okay, we all know what that is. That's an producer's insurance policy. Mulch litter, it's huge. And it really captures those 1/10 inch of rain, and so it's wise to have that in your pasture land. Now I want to talk a little bit about our corn work over the years. You know, kind of funny, back in 1998, we just got going out there at Lanigan, and there was a variety came down the road called Amazing Graze. Anybody hear of that variety? Amazing Graze. Out of Baldridge Farms, Ohio, 3,000 unit corn variety. How do you think it did at Lanigan, Saskatchewan? Not very well. Okay, so it got to about knee high, and I wrote an article in the Canadian Cattlemen's magazine, and the seed sales people were not very happy with me. But they had sold a ton of seed across Western Canada before we tested it at Western Beef. So really, you know, over the years we've worked with a lot of companies, and now, as you can see, these varieties we're talking about now, very adaptable, very, very adaptable. This is the interesting thing, you know, 98, right, when we first did some corn work, so we've been at it for quite a while. And this is crazy. It's like everywhere I go, it's a very challenging thing, right? Because, you know, we've been growing mixed hay or silage or green feed and putting it in the feed cow. Now we're asking her to go out and utilize a field full of small willow trees or something like that. So that's your feed source, right? Not the sound of the tractor and the feed wagon coming in anymore. Just to throw some more CHU to follow Gina is, yeah, so look at where you are. And as I say, I've been up here talking about corn grazing over here into BC. So it certainly is taking off. These are some of the websites that I use. You can see all the provinces have, and this is one that Dr. Dave Christensen steered me to, farmzone.com. And so and you get a lot of historic weather data there as well, min-max and precipitation. And it's quite specific. It'll give you some good information to see, okay, for the long term, am I going to be able to grow corn? I think when you guys calculate, do you use an equation and spreadsheet for your CHUs?
I'm not sure what to do.
Yeah. I followed it over the years at Lanigan, so you can build you just go get the equation, plug it into a spreadsheet on your Excel, and you can actually follow your corn heat units from year to year to year to see where you are. Dina went over a lot of this stuff. I am not an agronomist, but I've certainly learned a lot by hanging around the right people. That's the secret to a career, right, Dr. John? Is hanging around with people smarter than you, and it makes you look better. Like the folks like Jeff or John, we get a lot more results out of a study. Learned a lot with the agronomists, with some of the bigger seed companies that sell corn. And we have done the work, especially here. We put it in with the air drill, plugging off the runs, losing about 10-15% biomass. So I strongly suggest if you're going to go down this road, find a planter, work with the producer. We see guys buying them now. Some of the companies will actually have one. Some of the bigger agribusinesses, and they'll work with you. They're selling you the product. Might as well help you get it into the field. And that's all about precision planting, like you heard, right depth and warm soil. And that's a nice clean field after 2 shots of glyphosate, 4 and 8 leaf stage. And I've really cheaped out and just give it 1 application, but you would be surprised the weed population that comes if you only go 1 application. And it really does suppress yield. It's amazing. You can just see the difference in height. The suggestion to seed is there. That might be more of an Ontario suggestion. We don't get our act together at our research facility every year properly to get worried about or thinking about getting it into the ground by at least the end of May. But I've seeded it May 30th, June 1, June 9, and it has still come. It has still grown a great yield per acre. It's quite a crop. Where does it fit in terms of a grazing ruminant or maybe a pregnant beef cow? It actually meets and exceeds what she needs. And so we've done work on all those systems I just talked about. I've seen cows increase body condition from grazing corn. To put on condition in the winter months, that's a challenge. But and not to say you want to have thin cows coming onto the cornfields, but certainly be aware of the nutritive value of it, because I know you feed tested it, and then know you're going to limit graze it, so they'll maintain body condition. We've done some work with calves. I think I'll speak to it here a little bit in the slides coming up, kind of background calves. And so we've heard a little bit about that. As I suggested, we were trying to hit that half milk line at the first killing frost. And so I'm trying to deal with adequate starch for energy, but also good fiber to keep that rumen functioning. So forcing them to come back, to go back and graze the structural fibrous parts of the plant, that the leaf, the stalk, the stover, the tassels, is huge. And so there's a similar slide as you saw, half milk line. Some of the producers are they'll mix a couple of varieties together just to hedge that issue. They don't get full grain maturity corn. There's just the digestibility of it, okay, and percent of dry matter. So a lot of it, weight by weight, as you've seen from that picture Gina had, is the mature cob itself, okay, and as well a lot of the fiber here you can see is in those parts of the plant, fiber, NDF. To keep the rumen functioning. That's one thing that they are going to do is they are going to go out and they're going to vacuum up the cobs first. And so they figure out the ice cream part of the plant. And I think I've seen naive cows mentioned as well. When our cows first saw corn, they had no idea what to graze. They went out we gave them 2 or 3 rows. What we do is that we have cows never seen corn. Is that we'll only give them 3 or 4 rows, maybe the length of this room or this building, and then I give them some supplemental round bale and a round bale feeder. And these cows ate that bale, they ate every dead blade of grass around all the fence posts, and about day 3, they figured out, oh, maybe there's something in this other stuff. And then once 1 or 2, all of a sudden everybody was in there gangbusters. And so it's a leader-follower. It's an adaptive behavior, right? To say, okay, but once they figure this out, they're all waiting for you to move that electric wire. In fact, they'll mow you down. So they're going to go after the cobs first, and they're going to leave the rest of this later on. So that's where we're suggesting that is the first 24 hours. They are going to get a lot of intake of cob with some fiber, but then day 2, day 3, day 4, they got to come and back graze and utilize the remaining part. And you'll see guys, this is up at Big River, Mike Bartlin, back when he was running cows, and you'll see some guys, this will be black before they move that electric fence. And so, maybe that's a little bit too much, but really, and I've also found is that it's very variety dependent, and so some varieties, they'll just clean it up really well, some other varieties maybe not. So you have to experiment, as we heard, work with different companies and figure out which one works, grows for you in where you are. I'll talk a little bit about some work that we just finished up, looking at allocation length without a fiber source. And this is big, is that make sure you've got a good mineral program. Okay, so you're getting a lot of phosphorus from the corn, and so it's going to muck up that cal-phos ratio. Should be 2 to 1 or greater, right? So feed a good trace mineral, make sure those micros are in there, copper, zinc, and manganese, as well as that proper cal-phos ratio if you are out there grazing corn. This is just some work that we did quite a while ago. We looked at 5 different varieties. There's the range of CHUs, and so we grazed it November to Feb. This is our data. We weren't quite getting the yields you were under pivot. I'm averaging between 5.5, but that's the attraction of corn. You're getting 2.5, 3 times the biomass per acre compared to your small grain cereals, or your oat, your barley, and if you can winter cows, wow, that's important. Nutritive value, we separated structures, right, for protein and for energy. So a lot of energy. This gets a little bit challenging for those 3rd trimester cows, so maybe if you're grazing corn right up to calving, pay attention to protein. You might have to throw a little bit of a protein sup out there. There's our input costs. When we do the trials with Kathy, we've always put our economics up there, range from 206 to it'd be much higher today, I know. But yeah, high input, high risk, but certainly, you know, for me, it's all about how many graze days I get per acre. If I'm going to get about 200, I feel I'm meeting my input costs, and then so after that, our costs are going to be certainly cost effective. I believe Kathy's numbers today are between $2.50 and $3 per day to dry lot a cow. So, you know what, this is the attraction of is there other alternatives maybe to reduce that cost. This is the calf work we did. So we have 5-weight calves over 3 years. The work we've done typically is 2 to 3 years because of the environment. This is some of Steph McMillan's work. We know that you know, it meets or exceeds that pregnant cow, but for these guys, we need them to gain. And when it's minus 20 or minus 30, we had to also throw in a bit of a range pellet, set at about 5 or 6, 4 pounds per head per day. There it is. Just to get them to meet that targeted. I was looking for about 1.8 pounds a day. And so the base forage itself just wasn't enough for those calves to gain. So if you've got a backgrounding program, obviously you have a target gain and you have to end weight and a market for them afterwards. So our 3 systems were calves grazing corn, or swath grazing barley, or here we're back in that traditional pen in the dry lot, feeding them a dry-based TMR with hay and pellet. These calves then came out of Lanigan, and then we brought them to the feedlot with John, and we put them on 1 or 2 different feedlot diets. And so either the diet contained corn grain or barley grain. And just a quick snippet of what happened here is that we followed them all the way through the carcass as well, but we found that those calves that were on corn grazing in the backgrounding and they were fed corn grain in their feedlot diet, more of them went certified Angus beef for some reason. So did we ever find out the reason why? I can't remember. We mined the data, but there was nothing standing out. That's obvious. That was the calves going out, and that was the calves coming back after about 30, 40 days. And so sometimes you have a field system, and Mother Nature doesn't work with us to get it done, but certainly you have to do strategies, come back in the spring, and use it that way. We found that these calves, we had to put some trainer cows out there to show them how to go after the corn, and they did quite well. In fact, they cleaned it up quite nicely. So it's whatever utilization you want to strive for, but certainly, you know, it's an adaptive process. There's our quality. Here's our barley swath, okay. But the corn can get around that 7.5 to 8. So maybe you've got cows grazing corn. Now we have producers grazing corn with just cows, wean cows, or calves, or pairs. And so there's some producers in the province that graze them as pairs. They don't peel them off. They'll also, you know, put out maybe some supplemental fiber as well. So it's whatever system works for you at home. This is the ADG over 3 years, average daily gain of our systems. There's our barley swath and our corn and our dry lot. Did it have a negative effect? Okay, did this the background system have a negative effect on feedlot performance? No. In fact, they all finished quite nicely, and that was their average daily gain in the feedlot. Gain, our cost to gain. Why? Because of lower reduced yardage costs and no manure hauling costs. So, you know, extensive grazing, getting those calves out there, backgrounding. In fact, we're starting a trial with Travis and company coming up this fall at the new LFC, just looking at backgrounding alternative extensive systems. Just to finish up, what are some of the issues? I think we saw that earlier, but put them in there full. You know, maybe have an emergency pasture if you get a wreck. I have had those many phone calls. I hate to admit, from the veterinarian saying, Bart, I'm down here at Cinnabon. I've got a producer who's lost 11 head that are done, and about 14 more with burned out rumen. And you know, he did not limit graze. He did not limit. He turned 40 acres of corn. He turned about 150 critters into there. So after day 4, they'd been doing nothing but vacuuming up cobs, and they had been wrecked. So We looked at some of that rumen parameters with some cannulated cows in some of our research. This is Divya Josie's work. And so we had these are cows that have a rumen cannula on their side, so we can actually go in and take samples and look at volatile fatty acid profile, rumen ammonia, and pH with this little gadget, courtesy of Dr. Penner. So we can measure fluctuations in pH inside the rumen as these cattle are grazing in real time. And so it tells us some interesting things, whether or not they're actually experiencing digestive upset or signs of SARA or subacute rumen acidosis. This is Divya's work. Here she is, real trooper, February the 14th, out there about -25 collecting rumen samples. Interesting what happened. Here's our corn program and our swath barley and our barley hay, our Drylot. And that was a measure of the pH that was duration, less than 5.8, would be suggestive of subacute rumen acidosis. And you can see in year one, it wasn't really the corn, it was the swath barley where we saw that. Why? Because in year one, it's not just cows like corn. And so we had tremendous predation from wildlife. Thousands of blackbirds came in and ate nearly 2/3 of every cob. However, in the second year, yes, it was an issue. This is just to finish some of Brianna Anderson's work, looking at 3 versus 9 day. So everybody doesn't listen to Bart. They give them 9 days or 2 weeks of corn grazing, whatever, fine. I think you mentioned that you might get away with it 1 year, 2 years, but you know, it's just a kind of the elephant in the room, and it might just show up. That's what Brianna looked at was many things, 3 versus 9 day, without a fiber source. And she also looked at obviously cow performance and then looked at rumen pH dynamics as well. There's our cow data, and I just want to show you the positive body weight change that they all did very nicely, whether or not they were on a 3-day fiber, 3-day no fiber, or 9-day with or without. And that's good. So she also collected rumen samples and pH, and this is just a snippet of previous data we saw from Divya's trial. And here we have 9-day with fiber, 3-day with fiber, here's 9-day no fiber. So a lot of time where that pH is dropped, causing maybe a sore tummy or a bellyache in that cow. And so sometimes it's an acidotic environment. So I guess just to summarize, you know, we're going to get good yield. That's the attraction. You know, protein, we need to look at that, pay attention to it, especially for 3rd trimester cows. You know, what we did find when you do put that fiber out there, so you need to figure out, is it 5% of diet, is it 10% of diet? Is there will be maybe some more of the fiber. What do you want them to graze? You want them to graze the corn, but get a little bit of fiber, so we do see that substitution effect with that as well. And they will select in order of plant structures. They'll go after the cobs and the corn grain. And certainly at the end of the day, if you don't want to just graze corn alone, maybe think about bringing in a fiber source. This is something that we're going to be looking at, myself and Greg Penner as well, is this snaplets, which is just taking certain structures of the corn plant and maybe having higher nutrient value in the pit and then coming out and grazing the stalks. So this is a typical fall-winter program for Nebraska and South Dakota. And so now we're going to see that here in Saskatchewan. So it's here, folks. This is just to finish some of Kathy's comparisons to feeding Drylot, whether you're swath graze, bale graze, grazing residues, or corn or stockpile forages. And so absolutely extensive graze, capture the nutrients. This is something, if you've never done it, I always suggest go small. Maybe not seed down a half a section of corn right away. Small steps, it's prudent. And as I said, we're starting some of this new research using snaplets. There's our new website, so you can click on there, and we have some videos there for you to watch, as well as a bunch of fact sheets. So thanks for your attention. Any questions? Yeah.
If your cows are used to swath grazing, is there going to be much of a, when we used to eat in the green feed, is there going to be much of a So like, what would the transition be from, say,
From
barley,
swath grazing to
yeah.
corn grazing? Well, like I say, is that maybe you know, give them some type of a grain fodder in their diet for a good week. Obviously, some grain in there is going to help adjust those rumen bugs, right, to change a little bit. And then also, like we did, is that just give them if they've never seen corn, then that first week we just give them 3 or 4 rows.
So you could probably go from, say they were on swath grazing or something before,
Yep.
and then they go into the corn, and you give them hay or something.
Yeah, just a little bit of
Roll
fiber,
through the-
not the major portion, because the buggers will vacuum up the hay, and that's a substitute for that. So we just gave them maybe 1 bale for whatever 40 cows, and then over another week or so, you can maybe wean off the fiber. You can keep it out there if you're worried about rumen or acidotic issues, but some guys feed it, some guys don't. So this is the thing I see too, is that guys that are giving them 2 weeks of grazing corn, or maybe 3 weeks, there's always a fiber source there. So it's all
I was
about.
kind of thinking a couple of bales of hay a day or something while they're on the, just till they get used to it.
So you're thinking of putting it in this summer?
Yeah.
So, well, how many acres are we thinking now?
Oh, I don't know, 30.
Yeah. How many cows do you have?
Maybe 270.
Yeah. So I would, with that 30-acre field, I'd probably divide it into 5.
Yeah, it'd be
Something like that.
3 to 4
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah. So. Other comments?
What's the quick and easy way of determining your yield that you have in your grazing corn?
There is no quick and easy way to measure yield in a field of corn. What we do is we cut down 17.5 feet a row, which is equivalent to 1/1000th of an acre. So you cut, that's a lot of biomass, 17.5 feet a row, bring it in, weigh it on some scale, and then you'll take a portion of that, maybe microwave it so you can just check for dry matter. And then, so that's the deal, is that 17.5 feet a row, and do that. We've done it 3 or 4 areas in the field. I haven't, my students did it, but that gives us, and it's so then it's all about how do I get a representative sample sent away to the feed test lab. We've heard we had a wood chipper, and it's a good wrist strengthening action with shears, cutting those corn plants up as well. So yeah, quick and easy is 17.5 feet of row, and taking it up about 3-4 inches, cutting it, and then we just bring it in and weigh it.
If you have lots of corn stalks left over, is that a symptom of the corn being too mature?
It's both. It's either, if there's lots of stalks, it is an indication that maybe it's gotten a little bit too mature. I think Gina was mentioning that corn's a funny plant, is that it takes its nutrient value, as it gets mature, it actually puts it into one structure, the cob. So, and so it depends on, it's maybe an indication that corn is maybe 3/4 milk line, maybe full, maybe black layer. But I've also seen some varieties that they were not. They were actually half milk, but the cows just did not like to consume the stalk. And so to me, I think it's just the sugar content in those different structures will vary too from variety to variety.
Have you tried different varieties, like a green variety or a silage variety, as far as?
I guess some of the early work we did in 01 were with some of them were grain, most of them in silage varieties. We also did the Canamase, which is the dwarf. I don't know if you heard of that. That's 80,000 seeds per acre. They're Manitoba people. And, the cows seem to like that as well. But yet I've also heard other producers say that doesn't work very well for them. So, at the end of the day, I would suggest probably a silage variety. So corn on corn was another question I heard. We have done corn on corn for 6 years on one field, and there is issues of residue, right? If it's a variety, obviously they're not cleaning up, but it's amazing. So we typically come in with a big summer's disc, it's called, and so that does a really good job of getting that residue to the point where it's going to start to decompose. And the other thing I noticed with corn is that if you set everything right, once it pokes this little, cotyledons up and starts to go, it's off to the races. And so you would think it would not push through some of that trash, but it does. And we've had corn fields where we've had plow-ins when it was about that high, and it all went like that, but it recovered and came like that. We've had gophers that went down the flipping row and dug out every seed, drove you nuts. But it still yielded not bad, even though Gaynor was out there with his family. So, it's a very resilient crop. The only thing is that you're right, in years of low rainfall and low heat units. And I've had early frost. So I've had the August frost, the end of August, and it just did not form cob, and they did go through it like a windstorm. So I heard the comment about sod seeding. We've done that too, but it did reduce yield. It did, like seeding it right into maybe an old pasture where you burn it off and want to grow corn. It did reduce yield.
You were mentioning there's a transition period from the cow's gut going from hay to corn grazing. Is that the same for silage? Like silage would have more fiber in it. Should there be a transition period from going from hay to silage for the gut to get used to grazing there?
Not really, no. I don't. I think silage, it's a different flavor, and a different taste preference. Okay, so it takes them a while to figure it out, but not quite the same as grazing whole plant corn. Any other comments?
If not, then
Okay, thanks.
I guess